From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hi, everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas and Stunning Digital Marketing. In today's podcast, I sit down with Todd Jones for his bi-weekly segment, Copywriting with Todd Jones. In today's podcast, we are going to talk about 5 lessons that Todd Jones learned from storytelling from pro wrestling. Sit down as we break this down, and there will be a link to the original article in the show notes. So listen to the conversation that Todd and I had. This podcast is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency that can help protect your WordPress website today. Go to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and see what we can do to help you protect your business investment. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. And today we're going to do our segment, Copywriting with Mr. Todd E. Jones. How are you, Todd?
I'm pretty good. It's getting later today, starting to get a little tired, but I'm doing good.
Me too. Today I thought we'd talk about lessons learned from your wrestling storytelling.
Storytelling, lessons I learned about storytelling from professional wrestling.
And it's funny because you talk about that in an article you've written on Copy Fight, so people can go find the article, which is really good. And the first thing you talk about is you have to make them feel. Isn't marketing and storytelling both all about emotion?
Yeah, I think that's how you do it. That's one of the ways you do it. And I think people are allergic to emotion a lot of times. But I mean, studies have shown over and over and over and over again that people are very emotional when they buy. Sure, do they research stuff? Yeah, absolutely they do. But whenever they're ready to pull the trigger, it's almost always some kind of emotional reason. Now, when I say emotional, I'm not talking about manipulative necessarily. I think one of the best emotions you can elicit from someone, especially in a B2B setting, is trust. And if you don't have that trust, the old saying, people do business with those they know, like, and trust. But you and I grew up watching wrestlers in the 70s and 80s.
We did.
We know, but this is before the era of paid live events, they call it now. The big pay-per-view events. This is back, and so my reference point for this is Georgia Championship Wrestling. I watched as a kid. I know you watched the old AWA in the Toronto, Minnesota area,
and the old International Wrestling at Grand Prix Wrestling out of Montreal in French Sunday morning.
And I guess Stampede Wrestling too. I guess Bret Hart, Stu Hart's organization as well. But and also we had Memphis, was just like 2 hours away. So from time to time we'd have access to Channel 5, which carried the Memphis wrestling. So those are my reference points. But we had WTBS almost the whole time I was a kid, which was Atlanta. And so it was called Georgia Championship Wrestling. It was loosely connected with all the other NWA territories, including the one in Florida. And so the payoff event, and by payoff, I don't mean money-wise. I mean, well, there was money involved. The payoff event where people usually ended their beef with someone was the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia. And the line you almost always would hear is, "I will see you in the Omni." And so what they had to do, and these guys were really good at it. There weren't really women wrestlers back then, not many anyway. So I'll just say guys. What they had to do was sell the Omni. Now, it wasn't just Omni they were selling all these other events in all these cities leading up to it. But the Omni was the event, right? That's where what we call it now pay-per-view. That's where the pay-per-view would happen. Only it wasn't pay-per-view, but it would be where the main matches would be where championships or the fights would be settled, the scores would be settled, and so they had to sell those tickets. And I laugh now and I say they're selling tickets. Sometimes I'll say that Monday Night Raw or SmackDown or whatever. I'll say they're selling tickets. And leading up to WrestleMania, with the complex story, which I do talk about the story in this article of Cody Rhodes chasing the title and Bloodline in the way, which means Roman Reigns had the title and The Rock gets involved, and Wayne Johnson, if you don't know who The Rock is, the movie star, and all the different things that they put in the way. It's like I would just shake my head each week and go, they're selling tickets. They're selling tickets. That's exactly what they're doing. And there was like 170 some odd people showed up for three nights of wrestling in Philadelphia that weekend. They set some records, I believe. It's just astonishing to me. That stadium holds 70 something thousand people, and they filled it up. 2 nights of WrestleMania, and including the NXT event on Friday night. Well, they had SmackDown as well. I mean, it was just so they had to sell tickets, and they sold it by you believing in what was going to happen. You believe in the wanting to see what would happen. Is Dusty Rhodes going to finally take that title off of Ric Flair? That whole thing sells tickets, and we could do that in business too. And I'm not necessarily talking about it in that standpoint, but definitely in terms of trust and connection. Those types of emotions can be something a business can deliver on. And we talked about it in our episode about origin story. That's one way you can do that, by telling your origin story. There are other things. When I talk about business storytelling, I'm talking about from a lot of different perspectives, right? So telling those business stories is very helpful in connecting with the audience.
And the second point you make is there's always a villain. Isn't that so true? Whether it's wrestling stories, a movie, a novel you're reading, something on TV you're watching, it's always a bad guy, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, and it helps to know their origin story, right? And why they're a bad guy. I talked about Ric Flair in the article, who was probably one of the greatest heels to wrestle in professional wrestling. We got a lot of them, and in business, there's always a villain. Sometimes it's your own self is villain. Sometimes it's the villain you're overcoming, the problem you're trying to solve as a business owner, either to move your business forward, or sometimes the business just started completely by solving a problem. I couldn't find what I needed, so I went ahead and did it myself. You see that a lot, and I referenced in that origin story podcast episode about Shark Tank. You will hear a lot of those kind of stories. We needed this, but we couldn't find it, and so we created it ourselves. So that becomes a villain. And so everybody has a villain, nemesis. And professional wrestling showcases that as well as anything.
And then the third point, which is so true in, again, wrestling or any other novel, you have to overcome some adversity somewhere, right?
Yeah, and sometimes that adversity is the villain, and then that's kind of what I was getting at with the last point. And certainly, I tell the story, and it's very complex, and it lasts a long time. And I give a brief synopsis of it. It still is very long in the article about the Cody Rhodes last 2 years, right? 3 years ago at WrestleMania, he returns to WWE after being away for 7 years, and he returns to WrestleMania I think it was either Monday night or Friday night after that. I'm not sure. He comes out to the ring and cuts a promo. That's what they call it, a promo, whenever a wrestler gets in the ring and talks, or backstage or whatever. And he explains why he comes. One reason he comes back is to win the title, to win the big title. No one in his family has ever won the highest title in the WWE. His dad held on to it for a couple minutes when he won it in the 70s, but he won by countout, so he could not keep the title. Now, interesting side note, that was actually the WWF. So it was a precursor to what became the WWF and then eventually the WWE. He was on loan to Vince McMahon Sr. From the NBA for that match against superstar Billy Graham. And he won the match by countout. They actually handed him the title. He held it up, but then explained to him he couldn't win the title. The title doesn't change hands. For a count out. You have to pin them or submit them. And so he didn't get to win that. Cody's brother Dustin was in WWE for many years, and the highest title he held was either the tag team title or the Intercontinental Championship. But and Cody the same. But none of them had ever held the highest title, either the World Heavyweight Championship or the Undisputed Championship. So he chased Roman Reigns for 2 years. He started with the first year. His role documented. He rips his pec muscle, tears his pec muscle. He actually wrestles a match with it like that. And it's really kind of brutal to watch. He has a surgery, and we think he's out for months. He comes back in January the next year for the Royal Rumble, and he wins the Royal Rumble. He chooses Roman Reigns, who's the Universal Champion. We all thought he was going to win it at WrestleMania, right? The story is going to pay off, and he didn't. And as soon as he got beat, I said to myself, it's going to take a little bit longer for him to win that story, because it was very much like his dad when his dad won the NWA title from Ric Flair after chasing him for a couple of years. So we went back to this again. He had this a series of matches against the biggest, baddest alpha male in WWE that summer. 3 matches. He won 2 of them, and then he won the Royal Rumble again. And then The Rock entered the picture, and he wanted to wrestle his cousin Roman Reigns instead of Cody. And anyway, it got really convoluted at the end, but they put these roadblocks in the way. But Cody, the story paid off, and Cody did win the title at WrestleMania back in March. And so it was like a 2-year long chase for Cody to win that title. That adversity, he had this adversity, this big goal, and he had multiple adversities along the way, right? Some that wasn't even a part of the script. Like he wasn't, tearing the pec, that wasn't in the script, but it happened.
And then number 4, everybody likes a good comeback story, don't they?
Yeah. 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 It's one of my favorite stories. I tell about Ted DiBiase before he was the $1 Million Man in the WWE. He was a baby face for a while in Georgia Championship Wrestling. And he and the Junkyard Dog were feuding with the Fabulous Freebirds, which all 5 of those men are in the WWE Hall of Fame, I do believe. And they had a spot, and I actually read the backstory on this because I was curious, and I won't get into that, but it was very fascinating. They had a spot where Terry Gordy pile drives DiBiase on the concrete. He may have done it twice. He did it at least once, which, that you don't do that, right? They didn't have padding on the floor back then in the studio where they did Georgia Championship Wrestling. He pile drives him on the concrete. They roll him in the ring. They get the 1, 2, 3, and then they commence to pile drive him 2 or 3 more times. And so but according to the script, he broke his neck. He was out for months. And I remember, and I had to go look for this, Rob, because, I'm like probably 10 or 11 years old, maybe, whenever this happened. And maybe 9 years old. I don't know. It was like 81 or 82. So I was pushing, I might be 10 or 11 years old. They had this vignette, was when they kind of behind the scenes look, right? And he's in the hospital, and he's talking about the injury, and then they show him starting to work out, and he's starting to get stronger. And at the end of the video, if you remember at the time, and your listeners will remember as well, at the time, Fame, the movie and the song by Irene Cara was hot, really hot. And that Fame song is very much akin to the old Rocky theme song, right? It kind of gets you fired up. They were playing the Fame song at the end of the video, and I can always remember that. And so, yeah, the comeback story. There's a lot of comeback stories, but that one just stuck out to me, and I recapped that in the article.
It's funny you talk about the fabulous Freebirds, and we all know, and I don't know if you know this, the Freebirds went at it with the Rougeau brothers around the same time period all over Quebec. And it was so bad in those days, the Quebec Athletic Commission, which kind of governs pro wrestling in the province, would not allow a steel cage match. They had to have the final match in Sudbury, Ontario, to get away with Quebec's
Oh, having a steel cage.
entertainment laws. Yeah, it was that bad.
They
And
were some of the most villainous tag teams of that particular time. I mean, they just did some, and Terry Gordy was a big barrel chested man. I mean, he was really big, and Buddy Roberts was not a very big guy, but he was very sneaky. And and then of course you had Michael P.S. Hayes outside running around the ring. I mean, they had they call it the Freebird rule, right? You had three, any two of them could wrestle to defend their titles. And then the New Day implemented that when they held the titles back about 10 years ago, and with an homage to the fabulous Freebirds. So
yeah, and this I remember the final match in Sudbury was so bad they aired it on free TV like a couple of weeks ago because they had to, because the rematch was held in the Montreal Forum. So here we go again, right? And you're trying to sell tickets in the big venue. And
mhm,
so bad,
mhm.
Todd, with the fake blood capsules, because that's what they used back in the day, was blood capsules, that they actually had to X out the wrestlers' faces for 3/4 of the match on public TV. That's how bad it
Because
was.
of blood.
Yeah. Yeah. It was absolutely absurd. And you could not show a match like that today. It's just
Was it
ridiculous.
because of the blood?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So they don't usually do that on network TV unless, of course, you're watching AEW. AEW has a tendency to do that a little bit because they're on cable TV, and they kind of a lot of like NWA type stuff back in the day. But there was an I Quit match in the Clash to Castle between Cody Rhodes and AJ Styles, and I'm thinking to myself, if Cody's in a match like that, he's always going to bleed. I mean, it's just going to happen. And then AJ bled too by the end of the match. So, but that tends to be reserved for the premium live events in WWE for the most part.
Anyway, and then the fifth point you make, and I honestly think the fifth point should be the first point, but that's, not my article, um, is keep it really simple. I think sometimes
Mm.
people overcomplicate stories and things. What do you think?
Yeah. So, and I totally understand in the marketing world, they like to point out, the old, well, it started with a book that came out, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe, about using the hero's journey,
Yeah.
um, which it's a brilliant formula. It is. We all, if you don't know the story, Joseph Campbell wrote about it in the 60s, I believe it was. Um, and then we kind of learned about it whenever it was revealed that George Lucas used that formula to do the Star Wars movies. And then I started looking at movies on the screen and started seeing it everywhere. I was like, yeah, almost any kind of hero story. I was in the middle of watching a movie one time. I was looking at the screen, go, that's the hero's journey. It was like King Arthur or something. And so that was been used. There's lots of story archetypes, by the way, and those are great for doing a movie, a long, complex storyline for sure. But when you're trying to do something on a website, or even in wrestling gets complex too, it's not so much that you can't be complex, it's that you don't want to stray too far from the familiar, right? If you go way outside the box, you lose people. So and then you confuse them. And it's exactly the quote I used straight from Jeff Jarrett, which he got straight from I want to say his grandmother, but they said if you confuse them, you lose them. And I want to say, if you confuse, you lose. And there's a lot of truth to that. So, don't stray too far from the familiar. If you are using in a like a cinematic production, you are using the hero's journey, it's familiar. People have seen it. I talk about the assassin story because the assassin story is everywhere. Anytime you watch any kind of assassin movie, I hope I don't get your podcast banned by using that word, but John Wick or anything else, the assassin story is almost always the same. It's a guy or gal. I've seen some with women who had a role as an assassin, and they leave the industry somehow. They get out of the industry,
And then
and then usually the bad guys, the bad guys will kidnap or kill or something, a family member, and they pulls them back in, and they have to get justice, and that I've seen that play out over and over again. I even saw it play out in the movie a while back called Mr. Nobody or something like that. Nobody, I think. And it turned out he was like a CIA with special skills, but he had fallen into a life of boredom. And he's a family man and all that, and he had to, bring his skills back out. So I call those assassin storyline because that's what you see a lot in those types of movies. I don't have any problem with using a complex storyline. I just think you don't want to stray too far from the familiar. If you go too far outside the box, you will confuse people, and then, as Jeff says, you will lose people. So really, when you watch wrestling, there's complex storylines, but they pretty much stick to the familiar. Like in almost every match, there's a baby face, a good guy or good girl, and there's a heel, the bad guy or the bad girl, almost always. There was a match at Clash of the Castle for the world title where on paper both of them were heels. Drew McIntyre was a heel and Damian Priest was a heel. But because they were having it in Scotland and Drew was from Scotland, at least for this PLE, he was clearly the baby face. The fans were cheering for him.
Yeah.
But you just don't want to stray too far outside of that familiar.
And then there's been the odd match where you've had two good guys, or even better, when the heels win the match and then one of the good guys turns on the other guy, and then you have a third heel right in the middle of it all.
Yeah, well, that happened a lot, especially what happened in the UFC. But in recent years, in the last year, I think it was, they were looking for a way to write Ronda Rousey off TV in the WWE because she was leaving, and she was a tag team partner. In fact, they were the tag champs in the women's side with Shayna Baszler, and who was they're both former UFC fighters. And Shayna turned on Ronda. Now, in most days, that would make her the heel, but not in this instance. That actually the fans wanted that, and they were cheering her. So when they had the last match, Shayna was clearly the baby face, but she's much more natural heel. I think she has since then sort of kind of reverted back to heel. But anyway.
So what we're going to do is we've kind of broke the story down. I'll link to the story in the show notes. Go read it. It's on the Copy Flight blog. Go read Todd's blog. Go read it now, please. And somebody wants to talk to you about storytelling, Todd. How's the best way?
Ping me on Twitter. Ping me on Facebook or LinkedIn, and then, or you can send me a message through the Copy Flight website. Tell me, storytelling, wrestling is just one area we see storytelling. I like it in music. There's a lot of storytelling in music. So I like the stories, and the stories behind music is fascinating to me as well. It's certainly movies and TV shows, and there's, and I like to talk about that, elements of storytelling and various cultural references, and feel free to tell me, what it is you like to engage your storytelling in. That's interesting to me.
Have a great day, Todd. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Have a good one.
This show is brought to you by StunningDigitalMarketing.com, your Toronto leader in digital marketing services. Not only do we protect your WordPress website, we can help you with your site, provide social media management for your business, or even do one-on-one consulting. To find out more, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Very special thank you to Todd Jones for doing his bi-weekly segment, Copywriting with Todd Jones, on the SDM show. Have a great day, everybody. Bye for now. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. I love you, and I think about you every day. For more information about Stunning Digital Marketing, your digital marketing experts, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.com or go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info to find out all the great places that Rob Cairns can be found on the web.